Prologue. The moment my new husband shoved my face into our wedding cake, I knew our marriage was over. For one stunned second, I could not understand what had happened. Cold frosting filled my nose. Cream clung to my eyelashes. The room exploded with laughter, and somewhere beside me, Steve was laughing louder than anyone. I stood there in the wedding dress I had saved for, planned around, protected for months. My makeup was ruined. My hair was crushed. Frosting stained the front of my dress. But none of that was what broke me. What broke me was the sound of his friends cheering. I had heard that sound before. Every time Steve had turned one of my hopes into a joke, they had been there to reward him for it. Every time I had swallowed my hurt so I would not be called too sensitive, that laughter had followed. And before our wedding, I had told him clearly, no pranks, no jokes at my expense, not on that day. He had promised. So when I wiped the frosting from my eyes and looked at the man I had just married, I did not see the years we had already spent together. I saw the years ahead of us. I saw every holiday, every anniversary, every vulnerable moment turned into entertainment. I saw myself explaining, forgiving, and shrinking over and over again while he smiled and said I knew what he was like. Then I took off my rings, placed them in his hand, and said, "We're done." Chapter 1. Steve and I had been together since college, although we studied completely different things. He trained to work with cars. I studied accounting. That difference suited us. I was quiet, organized, and analytical. I liked knowing what was coming. I made lists, checked numbers twice, and felt calmer when everything had a place. Steve could focus when he was working on an engine. He could spend hours listening to a strange sound, tracing a problem, and refusing to give up until he found the cause. But outside the garage, he seemed determined to make up for all that concentration. He was loud, restless, always performing. He could turn a grocery store line into a stage. He made faces in photographs, changed the lyrics to songs, and invented ridiculous stories just to see whether someone would believe him for 10 seconds. His friends were exactly the same. Put them together, and every normal evening became a competition to see who could get the biggest reaction. When we were students, I tolerated it more easily. Back then, everything felt temporary and light. We were young, tired, and usually broke. A cheap dinner could feel romantic. A ridiculous joke could make a bad week easier. And I loved him. When Steve was not performing, he could be wonderful. He was affectionate, attentive, and warm. He knew when I had spent too long staring at numbers and would place a cup of coffee beside me without interrupting. He could make me feel protected without making me feel weak. When we were alone and he was not trying to entertain anyone, I saw the man I believed he truly was. That was why I kept separating Steve into two versions in my mind. There was the man I loved. And there was the man who could not resist a joke, even when the joke hurt someone. After college, we started working and building a real adult life. We paid bills, bought furniture slowly, and learned which expenses could wait until the next paycheck. I handled most of the budgeting because numbers made sense to me. Steve handled anything mechanical and most of the repairs around our place. Our life was not glamorous, but it was ours. On weekday mornings, I usually woke first. I packed my lunch, checked whether Steve had remembered his, and listened to him search for his keys even when they were in the same bowl by the door. In the evenings, one of us cooked while the other cleaned. We argued mildly about laundry, grocery lists, and whether a chair was an acceptable place to store clothes. Those small routines made me happy. They felt like proof that we were moving forward. As our finances became more stable, I started wondering when he would propose. I did not hide that I wanted marriage. Steve knew. We had talked about a future together, and I believed we were building toward it. I never demanded a ring. I never gave him a deadline. But I hoped. That hope became something private and tender. Whenever we attended a wedding, I imagined standing beside him. Whenever we discussed saving money or moving someday, I pictured those decisions as part of a shared married life. Steve knew exactly what I was waiting for. And 3 times, he used that hope as a punchline. Chapter 2. The first time happened in his parents' living room during a large family celebration. The room was crowded. People were talking over one another, carrying plates, taking pictures, and calling relatives into different conversations. Steve suddenly took my hand and led me toward the center of the room. My heart changed rhythm immediately. He looked serious. Everyone nearby began to notice. Conversations softened. Faces turned toward us. Then Steve dropped to one knee. For a second, everything inside me went still. I remember looking down at him and feeling warmth rush through my entire body. I thought, this is it. After all these years, this is the moment I will remember forever. His family froze with me. Steve looked at my shoe. Then he announced that there was something on it and brushed away an imaginary speck of dirt. There had been nothing there. His relatives laughed. Someone praised him for being so helpful. Steve stood up smiling, clearly pleased with himself. I tried to smile too. I could feel my face burning, and not from happiness. My chest felt hollow, as though I had stepped forward expecting solid ground and found nothing beneath my foot. I did not confront him directly. That was one of my mistakes. Instead, I became quiet for several days and hoped he would understand. I thought my silence was obvious. I thought he would remember the expression on my face and realize that he had crossed a line. But Steve rarely examined a joke after the laughter ended. To him, a joke was over as soon as the room moved on. The second time happened at a barbecue with our friends. By then, I had convinced myself he would never repeat the same kind of prank. Even Steve had limits, I thought. Surely he had noticed how unhappy I had been after the first time. We were outside with paper plates, drinks, and music playing in the background. His friends were already laughing before anything had happened, because with Steve, they were always waiting for the next performance. Then he called my name. He stepped toward me and lowered himself onto one knee. Again, my heart reacted before my mind could protect it. I hated that. I hated how quickly hope rose inside me. I hated that even after the first humiliation, some part of me still believed he might be serious. Steve took my hand and spoke in the most romantic voice he could manage. Then he asked whether I would do him the great honor of driving him home, because he planned to drink beer. That had already been our plan. The request was unnecessary. The entire performance existed only to make me think he was proposing. His friends understood immediately. They laughed and shouted encouragement, telling him to stay strong and keep resisting marriage. I stood there holding a paper plate, trying not to let anyone see how deeply the joke had landed. This time, I confronted him in the car. The drive home was dark and quiet except for the tires against the road. I held the steering wheel too tightly and kept my eyes forward because I was afraid that if I looked at him, I would either cry or say something cruel. Finally, I told him the truth. That hurt me. Steve sighed and shifted into damage control mode. Come on, baby, you know how I am. He softened his voice. He touched my arm. He said he had not meant anything by it and that everyone had just been having fun. But I had not been having fun. I told him that the fact that he considered it harmless did not make it harmless to me. He listened, apologized, and promised he understood. I forgave him. The third time happened at the repair shop where he worked, when I brought him the lunch he had forgotten. The shop smelled like oil, rubber, and metal. Tools clattered in the background. His boss and several coworkers were nearby. One of Steve's coworkers was holding up a phone, recording. I noticed the camera, but I did not immediately understand why it was there. Steve walked toward me, smiling. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. My breath caught. This time, the setting did not matter. The noise of the shop faded. The camera made sense. I thought he had arranged for someone to record the proposal. I thought maybe the earlier jokes had been his immature way of hiding his real plan. I stood there holding his lunch, unable to move. Steve looked down and said, "Oh, my shoelace is untied." The room erupted. He tied his shoe, looked directly at the camera, and grinned as if he had just completed a successful performance. How was that, guys? Good one. Something inside me shut down. I did not yell. I did not cry in front of them. I turned around and walked out. He caught up with me outside. I turned to him before he could speak. "If you don't want to marry me, then don't," I said. My voice was shaking, but I forced myself to continue. "I'm not going to beg you. I'm not going to pressure you. But stop teasing me with a ring like I'm a starving dog chasing food." His expression changed. For once, he did not laugh. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He looked ashamed. I told him that every fake proposal had taken something private and meaningful to me and turned it into entertainment for other people. I told him that I was tired of being the object in his jokes instead of the person he was supposed to love. That time, he understood. Or at least, I believed he did. Chapter 3. 2 weeks later, Steve proposed properly. He took me to a restaurant and behaved like a normal, serious man. There was no audience waiting for a punchline, no friend filming from a corner, no exaggerated performance. When he reached across the table and spoke about our years together, I felt the old hope return, but this time it was mixed with fear. I watched his face carefully, searching for the sign that he was about to laugh. He did not. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. I loved him. I had always loved him. I wanted to believe the proposal meant he had finally understood the difference between being funny and being cruel. That same night, while the ring still felt unfamiliar on my hand, I told him exactly what I wanted from our wedding. I wanted romance. I wanted the ceremony and reception to feel sincere. I wanted one day in our lives that was not treated as material for a joke. I did not need everything to be expensive or perfect, but I needed to feel safe with him. No pranks, I said. No tricks, nothing at my expense, especially not at the wedding. Steve nodded. I made the boundary even clearer. I love you, but if you humiliate me at our wedding, we're done. His smile faded when he realized I was serious. He promised. Not casually, not with a laugh. He looked me in the eyes and promised he would be serious. During the months that followed, he behaved as though he had changed. We planned the wedding together around work, bills, and ordinary life. The planning filled our kitchen table. There were folders, printed estimates, guest lists, and notes written on the backs of envelopes. I kept a spreadsheet for every expense. Steve teased me gently about the number of columns, but he did not turn the wedding itself into a joke. We discussed what we could afford and what did not matter enough to stretch the budget. We compared prices, removed things, added them back, and removed them again. Some evenings, we sat across from each other after dinner with cold coffee between us, trying to decide whether one small detail was worth the cost. The process was exhausting, but I loved it. We discussed seating arrangements and tried to keep certain personalities apart. We looked at menu options and debated whether people would care about details that had already consumed hours of our lives. The cake mattered to me. Not because it had to be grand, but because cutting it together was one of the traditional moments I had always imagined. We chose the design carefully. I pictured us standing side by side, smiling for photographs, feeding each other one small bite like every ordinary couple. At home, wedding supplies slowly took over corners of our living space. Boxes appeared near the wall. Lists stayed attached to the refrigerator. Garment bags had to be protected from food, dust, and Steve's careless habit of dropping things wherever he happened to be standing. My dress became the center of its own small system of precautions. I saved for it, chose it, and went through fittings. Each time I saw myself in it, I felt a little more like the future I had been waiting for was real. There were moments when the pressure became too much. I would come home tired from work, see another message that required a decision, and feel tears rise from pure exhaustion. On those evenings, Steve sometimes surprised me by being patient. Those moments restored my trust. His friends also seemed quieter during the engagement. They still joked among themselves, but they did not make me the target. I took that as another sign that Steve had spoken to them. I began to relax. I moved through those months almost weightless with love. I was not expecting perfection. I was expecting respect. That should not have been too much to ask. Chapter 4. On the morning of the wedding, I woke with my stomach tight from nerves. For months, the day had existed as lists and payments, appointments and decisions. Suddenly it was real. Everything around me seemed fragile. My dress, my hair, my makeup, the schedule, my ability to hold myself together. But beneath the nerves, I was happy. I thought about Steve waiting for me. I thought about the promise he had made. I believed we were about to begin a more mature life together. The ceremony went beautifully. When I saw him, I felt the familiar ache of loving someone who had been part of nearly my entire adult life. His expression looked sincere. There was no smirk, No hidden performance, no glance toward his friends. I let myself trust the moment. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. When the ceremony ended, I felt relief wash through me. We had done it. We were married and nothing had gone wrong. The reception began, and for a while, everything continued perfectly. But those imperfections did not bother me. The important part was that the atmosphere felt warm. Steve was energetic but not reckless. He laughed, hugged people, and accepted congratulations. Every time I looked at him, I felt another layer of tension leave my body. He had kept his promise. At least, that was what I believed until the cake was brought out. People gathered around. Phones appeared. The room became louder as guests tried to get a better view. Steve and I stood together in front of the cake. I remember placing my hand over his as we held the knife. I remember the flash of cameras and the sound of people calling our names. I remember thinking that the day had become exactly what I had hoped it would be: emotional, imperfect, and sincere. We cut the first slice. I turned toward Steve with a small piece of cake, expecting the usual tradition. A careful bite, a photograph, maybe a little frosting on the lips. Instead, his hand moved behind my head. Before I could understand what he was doing, he pushed my face forward into the cake. The impact frightened me. For 1 second, I could not breathe properly. Frosting covered my nose and mouth. The cake pressed against my skin. My hands came up too late. Then the laughter hit me. It was immediate and loud. Steve's friends roared as though they had been waiting all day for the show. Someone shouted. Someone clapped. Steve laughed beside me. I lifted my head. Cream slid down my face. My eyes burned. My carefully applied makeup dissolved into streaks. I felt pieces of cake in my hair and against my neck. Frosting marked the front of my dress. The room blurred. I looked at Steve. He was still smiling. That smile hurt more than the physical shock. He knew. He knew how I felt about pranks. He knew what the fake proposals had done to me. He knew the exact boundary I had set. He had looked into my eyes and promised not to humiliate me. And then, on the one day when I had asked him to protect my dignity, he had chosen laughter. Maybe I was reacting too strongly. Maybe this was a harmless wedding tradition. Maybe I should laugh so no one would feel uncomfortable. Then I looked at the guests. Steve and his friends were laughing. Most of the others were not. Some people wore nervous smiles, the kind people use when they do not know whether they are expected to pretend something is funny. Others looked shocked. A few people stared at Steve with open disbelief. The room told me what I needed to know. My reaction was not the problem. I was not humorless. I was not difficult. I was not ruining a harmless moment. Steve had deliberately done the one thing I had begged him not to do. As I wiped frosting from my eyes, I felt years collapse into one another. His parents' living room. The barbecue. The repair shop. The laughter. The apologies. The phrase, "You know how I am." Suddenly, I understood that phrase differently. For years, Steve had used it as an explanation, as though his personality were a force of nature and everyone else was responsible for surviving it. But he knew how I was too. He knew I was private. He knew humiliation stayed with me. He knew that public jokes made me feel exposed. He knew marriage mattered to me. Knowing me had never stopped him. That realization was devastating. I looked at him, and I did not see our college years or the quiet evenings at home. I saw the future. I imagined becoming smaller to avoid giving him material. A wave of panic rose inside me, sharp and cold. I could not live that way. My hands were trembling as I reached for my rings. The wedding band resisted slightly because my fingers were sticky with frosting. I pulled it free, then removed the engagement ring that had once represented everything I had wanted. Steve's smile disappeared. The room became quiet. I placed both rings in his hand. "We're done," I said. My voice was low, but everyone heard me. Chapter 5. For a moment, no one moved. The silence after the laughter felt enormous. Then my friend hurried toward me. "Lauren," she said, reaching for my arm. "Lauren." I looked at her and forced myself to breathe. "Call a cab." Of course. She took out her phone immediately. That simple response almost made me cry. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not ask me to think about the guests, the money, or the embarrassment. She saw my face and believed me. The room came back to life all at once. Steve followed me. He caught my arm and tried to stop me. "Lauren, wait, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I pulled away. He kept saying it had been a joke. That word no longer meant anything to me. "I warned you," I said. "I asked you not to do this." I know, I wasn't thinking." But that was not true. He had thought about it enough to choose the moment. He had waited until the phones were raised and everyone was watching. He had put his hand behind my head and pushed. The act required intention. I did not want to hear another explanation. He begged me not to leave. He said we had just gotten married. He said the whole day did not have to be destroyed because of one stupid moment. But the wedding had not been destroyed by my reaction. It had been destroyed when he decided my humiliation was worth a laugh. My friend stayed close to me as we left. I could feel frosting drying against my skin. Every step in the dress felt heavy. The fabric that had made me feel beautiful that morning now felt like evidence of how much care I had given to a day he had treated like another stage. In the cab, I finally began to cry. Not delicately, not quietly. The tears came with humiliation, grief, anger, and disbelief. I cried for the wedding I had planned. I cried for the money and hours and hope poured into one day. I cried for the woman I had been that morning, trusting him completely. Most of all, I cried because I still loved him. I loved the man who brought me coffee. I loved the man who could repair anything and sit with me over a budget. I loved the man he was when he was not performing. But I finally understood that I could not build a marriage with only the version of Steve that appeared in private. The other version was real too. The version who needed laughter more than he needed to protect me was part of him. The next day, I filed for divorce. Steve called again and again. He sent messages. He apologized in every way he knew how. But regret was not trust. When I finally spoke to him, I told him the truth. "I love you," I said, "but I don't trust you anymore." He cried. So did I. I explained that the cake was not one isolated mistake. It was the final proof of a pattern. I had told him what hurt me. I had explained it clearly. I had given him chances. I had believed his promise. He had broken it in front of everyone we knew. Living with someone you do not trust is a kind of torture. Every meaningful moment becomes a threat. Every surprise makes your body tense. Every smile can hide a punchline. I did not want to spend my life waiting to discover whether the man beside me was about to protect my heart or use it to entertain a room. So I did not go back. Chapter 6. 2 years later, I met Mark. He was serious by nature. He could laugh, but he did not need to turn every moment into a performance. He did not use other people's discomfort as proof that he was funny. Being with him felt quiet in a way I had once been afraid to ask for. I did not have to study his expression when he reached into a pocket. I did not have to wonder whether a tender moment was real. I did not have to prepare myself for the possibility that my feelings would become a story he told his friends. Mark was not exciting in the way Steve had been exciting. He was safe. For me, safety was not boring. It was freedom. I could relax around him. I could speak honestly without being told I was too sensitive. I could trust that when I drew a boundary, he would not treat it as a challenge. We were happy. I sometimes heard things about Steve through people who still knew us both. They said he tried dating women who reminded him of me, but the relationships never lasted. They also said he eventually drifted away from the friends who had spent years laughing at his pranks. By then, it was too late for us. Part of me was sad that he had needed to lose our relationship before he began to understand what his behavior cost. But I did not regret leaving. I had spent years believing love required me to forgive the same wound as long as the person hurting me smiled afterward. It did not. Love can survive awkwardness, mistakes, and bad judgment, but it cannot remain healthy when one person repeatedly turns the other person's pain into entertainment. Steve did not lose me because of cake. He lost me because I told him where my heart was most vulnerable, and he used that exact place for a joke. On our wedding day, with frosting on my face and laughter filling the room, I finally stopped asking whether my feelings were reasonable. I stopped waiting for him to become the man he had promised to be. And I chose myself.